I beg you to try it, Patricia.
Let me get this straight, Carla. You disagree on the weapon, you disagree on the number of blows.
Listen to me, Patricia. You were there once in your life.
Hey people, Trish Wood here. And this is Trish Wood is Critical. Back from Bedeque, Nova Scotia. What a wonderful, beautiful little town. I was at the Free Speech in Medicine conference, helping to moderate it and present it with Chris Milburn and his wife, Julie Kerwin. And the wonderful, wonderful roster of people who came to this small, it's kind of remote actually, little town to talk truth about COVID-19 and specifically censorship in medicine that was brought to all of our attention during the pandemic. I believe it's a problem that started before COVID-19, but COVID-19 certainly put it into bright relief for us all, didn't it? And I got to meet my kind of favorite celebrity expert, namely Jay Bhattacharya, which was wonderful. And he's just as humble and kind and shy, a little bit shy, as he seems, which are really good qualities for him because he's shown us all how to maintain a certain amount of grace during times where, he was really being persecuted. So I was really happy to meet Jay and many, many other wonderful people, including Martha Fulford and other people who showed up to really help us go back and do a bit of a forensic audit on what happened in the past 2.5 years. And, on one hand, it was wonderful to be there. And on the other hand, it just reignited my anger at what happened to us all. So anyway, I'm back and I wrote a Substack about what happened. You can find it on my Substack for Trish Wood is Critical and read a little bit, but I need to make a correction too. The photograph that I used for the Substack, which I used before and said it was Bedeque, I was told this morning by somebody who lives out there that it in fact is not Bedeque. It's been mislabeled on the Google image search. It's actually Lunenburg. So I'm just making a little correction there for y'all. Bedeque is just as pretty as Lunenburg. So what I said at the Free Speech and Medicine conference that seemed to touch a nerve with many people and also with the people at an event I did the week before for the Ideas Institute with Bruce Pardy, who's also quite brilliant, is that when we gather together, those of us who have been awake and somewhat heretical about the way that governments and public health so-called experts have been handling COVID is, I say it's a bit truckery. And when I say truckery, everybody seems to know what I'm talking about. And I'm referring to the sense of joy and connection and belonging and fellowship that was brought about by the trucker convoy before our prime minister stomped on it. And remembering how sad we all were when that happened. So these events with experts who are prepared to speak out and to be with other people who share our views, they're very comforting. And I did have a little bit of a weep at each one. I mean, it was very, very moving for me. I'm sort of embarrassed about that. I don't know why I'm so fragile on that issue. I think it's because, we all spent such a long time thinking that we were maybe the only ones who thought this way, being shunned and picked on by family and friends, and certainly the legacy media too. Yikes, right? So being in those groups, like I was at in the Newmarket event and also the Bedeque event, it's very nurturing, and it does restore my faith in humanity generally and in Canadians more specifically. Although we had people in Bedeque from Australia and all kinds of places they flew in. Isn't that great? So that was wonderful for me. I'm glad to be home and be back doing the podcast. I missed working on the podcast while I was gone, but I'm so grateful that I was asked to participate in both of those events. So here's what's going on now. We have a report out of the UK on excess deaths, right? Which we've had talked about on this show before, primarily in connection to the jab. No one knows if the excess deaths we're seeing are caused by the jab or caused by the pandemic response more generally, right? And we could know if there was some kind of an inquiry into it. It should be called. They're not calling it because they probably don't want us to know what happened. But whatever happened as a result, very, very likely, of the public health response to COVID-19. So I just want to read a little bit of this to you. We can be happy that the Telegraph in the UK is actually covering this, a legacy media newspaper with some clout, right? So here's what it says. Excess deaths in England and Wales are currently running higher than in the main pandemic years of 2020 and 2021, figures have shown. Throughout October, there have been an average of 1,564 extra deaths per week, compared with a weekly average of just 315 in 2020. Wow, that's a real leap. And 1,322 in 2021. So that's a huge jump. They know they're not COVID deaths. They're being caused by something else. And the woman who wrote this, her name is Sarah Napton, says, health experts have warned that some of the unexplained deaths are being caused by collateral damage from the pandemic when operations and treatments were canceled or delayed as the health service concentrated on COVID. We are going to be paying for this singular and dangerous and wrong-headed focus on COVID-19 for a very, very long time. And I think we have to face up to the fact that there needs to be some kind of a reckoning here. We cannot stop talking about it. We must push this onto the agenda in a big way. They cannot move on, because if they move on, not only could it happen again, but it means that people responsible for the biggest public health blunder, maybe the biggest public policy blunder ever, get away scot-free. But in this case, if there isn't some kind of remedial action taken, they'll just go on wrecking more stuff, right? The managerial class. No one's apologized. No one has apologized. And probably everybody listening to this podcast knows 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 people who, as a result of either the shot, the lockdowns, the school closures, the closing of businesses, has suffered and maybe even died as a result of those decisions. And we're not going to let them go la, 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 la on their merrily way to screw something else up, right? We cannot do it. So there are excess deaths in Canada too. There's excess deaths in all Western countries that went this route. There's some good evidence. Part of it is caused by the jab, these sudden deaths that are happening. And there's also good evidence that people who had their cancer treatment delayed and other medical issues ignored are now dying as a result of that. This is terrible. This is terrible. And already in Ontario, I saw in the paper yesterday, they're ramping up the hospitals are full. Beware, beware. Hospitals have been full throughout the winter months every year in Ontario, where I live, for like 10 years. If you Google it, Google hospital overcrowded Ontario flu. This is a problem they go through every year, but now they've been given, and the hospital administrators who keep driving this narrative have been given ultimate power. And it's that ultimate power and the decisions to not treat cancer patients, to not do many of the things that people are entitled to, especially when they're getting socialized medicine. That's what, in a sense, has been driving this. It's protect the hospitals and protect the NHS while killing the patients. What's the point of saving the hospitals if doing so kills the patients who are supposed to be saved by the hospitals? This is nuts. It's the same kind of nuttiness around the lockdowns, right? Where I've used this phrase a lot. It came from the Vietnam War. We had to destroy the village in order to save it. And the public health people had to destroy people in order to keep them from dying from COVID. I mean, it's ridiculous. And we have to put our foot down and say, no, We are fair. We're not looking for revenge, but we are looking for admissions, accountability, and a plan that this will never happen again, and that the people who made these mistakes will be punished for them. I don't mean in any other way, but like they should be fired, right? We get fired when we do stuff wrong. Why aren't they? So we're going to talk a little bit more about COVID-19 and the aftermath at the end of the show, because we're going to talk about Emily Oster, who wrote a piece, I believe, for The Atlantic, in which the headline is that she is asking for a pandemic amnesty. What? So we can just move on. This ultra highly paid professor at Brown, an ultra liberal university, wants us to just move on from all the mistakes everybody made because, she says, oh, it was too hard for people to understand and we were scared. So I'm going to blow that right out of the water at the end of the show. I think it's terrible. I love people who say we should forgive. I'm a Christian. I believe in forgiveness, but we got to do the punishment part and the accountability part before we start forgiving here. That's my view. So I'm going to tell you who's on the show today. It's actually a bit of an offshoot of what we're talking about now, which is the absolute dysfunction of the lefty-driven managerial class running most parts of our society right now. There is a documentary on YouTube called Vancouver is Dying. That is my hometown. I watched it, and it's absolutely terrific. It shows the extreme dystopia that Vancouver is becoming. They will say out of homelessness, but it's not because of homelessness. It's because of drug addiction, right? Most of the people living in these tent cities have a drug problem or a mental health problem. It's not that they're not housed properly or that they have housing insecurity. It's that we're not dealing with the addict problem in the way we should be dealing with it, which is getting people into rehab and fixing them, right? It's bringing the city down. Crime is up. And it's a grotesque. And I'm just going to say this, it might sound sort of mean, but having to drive by those tent cities with the human poo and everything else, the fear of being attacked, that lowers everybody's quality of life. And I don't think that's fair to the other citizens, no matter how liberal they may be. No one wants to live adjacent to that or have their kids near that. So that is the other side of the coin. So the person who produced and directed that documentary, his name is Aaron Gunn. It's got like 2 million views. Great, eh? This is how citizen journalism can really work. Because you know what? The Fifth Estate didn't do this story. They should have. And it's because the managerial class in Vancouver, they're all lefties, right? That's what happens. They do something called harm reduction, which isn't necessarily getting hardcore addicts of fentanyl and heroin and all the other bad stuff that's killing people. It's not getting them into treatment and abstinence, which is where they need to be. That is my view. I have some experience with this. I know I'm right about it. The other guest we have is a chap named Leighton Woodhouse. He is a brilliant American independent journalist. He's written for Tablet and other big deal publications about the American cities, how they have gone down the tubes virtually for the same reason, and why these kind of egghead policies do not work. So we're going to interview Aaron Gunn first, and then we'll finish up with Leighton Woodhouse. I'm really excited to have them here because they're smart, and it's something we need to deal with. Plus, it's another way to expose how we are governed by people who don't know what they're doing. We've got to get them out. We've got to get them out. They are completely out of touch with what happened to people as a result of COVID public health policies. They have, let's just forgive everybody. Do they know anybody who died from a drug overdose because of public? No, they don't. I doubt it. And they expect us to live this way, surrounded by these tent cities. And even in Toronto, I know there's one because it's right across from where my best friend has a condo. I know, what the NIMBY, she's not NIMBY. Nobody's NIMBY here. I think people need to be looked after properly, but the solution is not letting them take over all the green space in cities that we need. We need to find a better solution that also helps them too. They're dying of drug overdoses, right? So Leighton Woodhouse comes up after Aaron Gunn on the show today. I think you'll find them both enlightening. They're terribly smart people. Here's my little pitch. So we are entirely listener funded, and you can support us. It's nice to do a rolling monthly because it means that we have some way to plan, right? So a rolling monthly through Patreon and PayPal or Substack is great. We prefer Substack now because PayPal and Patreon do not have great free speech reputations. So that would be great if you would want to join me on Substack, which is Trish Wood is Critical. We also have a merch store with new stuff coming in the next week or so. We're going to do one that kind of reflects the trans extremism pushback, which one hat will say just woman on it. That's for our female audience. And the other one is going to say hashtag adult human female. So I think women should start wearing those, right? Just, that's what we are, people. We've got to wake up from all this nonsense. And before we get to our interviews for today, I do want to make a bit of an apology to the people who attended in Bedeque. I wanted to meet with more of the listeners of the show. There were many, many show listeners at both of these events. And I was so grateful to see and meet the ones that I did. It was very, very moving for me. But here's what happened. I don't think about myself that way. And as much as I feel I have a connection to the people who listen to this show, I never think they want to meet me. Like you're right. Like it's just sort of not who I am in a sense. And I realized in Bedeque that I need to take more time to actually spend at these events than I was able to. So the next one I do, I promise I will make more time. What happened in Bedeque was I am also working on a documentary about COVID, and we were doing a bit of shooting for the documentary around the Bedeque meeting. So I was constantly being pulled out of there in order to do a piece to camera or an interview or something, and it did kind of crimp my ability to meet with people. So I apologize for that. I won't do that again because you are the important ones, the most important ones. And we are important to each other, aren't we? And I promised to do a shout out to Angela Heffernan of St. John's, Newfoundland. And she apparently is a seeker of truth, her friend told me. So I said I would do that shout out. So let's move now to our interview section. First, we're going to hear from Aaron Gunn, the producer-director of Vancouver is Dying, which it seems to be. And then we are going to move to Leighton Woodhouse and talk about what's happened up and down the American West Coast. There are elections coming next week, so we talk about that a little bit too. And we broaden out to other things, including the kind of death of legacy media. He's got a great piece in Tablet about how journalists go after fellow journalists if they do not toe the narrative party line. So here is my interview starting with Aaron Gunn. Hi, Aaron. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. How about yourself?
Well, I'm doing really well. It's kind of a twofold answer, I guess. After watching your film, I'm thrilled that indie media is doing the kind of work you're doing. That always lifts my spirits as an old school journalist. And I guess the flip side of that is that I grew up in Vancouver, and it's really sad to see the condition that parts of it, especially the east side, are kind of falling into now. I knew it was happening in the States because I go there a lot on work. When I was doing documentaries, I was in Seattle a lot, and there was trouble there, but I didn't actually realize it had gotten that bit bad in Vancouver. So I'm good and bad, and mostly just happy to have you here to talk about it. So tell me where you got the idea to do this film, which is called, accurately, I think, Vancouver is Dying.
Well, as someone who's lived in coastal BC for the past 30 years and kind of watched this problem get worse and worse and worse, it's one of those things that everyone's talking about, and yet they're kind of around the water coolers and at family dinners. And the government politicians didn't seem to be putting forward any new solutions. It was just more of the same that seems to have led us into this quandary in the first place. So what I really wanted to do is kind of pull the curtain back on what's going on in the downtown east side and what's been radiating out from that, and figure out what were the root causes and why has the problem continued to get worse despite the billions of dollars we've pumped into it, and kind of the self-congratulatory pats on the back that our politicians over the past 20 years have been giving themselves for, in their words, policy that's been leading the way.
Yeah, before we get into the actual doc, you said you were coastal BC. Where did you grow up, Aaron?
So I grew up in Victoria, and I split my time between Victoria and Vancouver.
Yeah.
So I have a little bit of a, I wouldn't call it an outsider's perspective on Vancouver, but the other interesting part that's not in the documentary, but as Victoria's grown, and the city here has been basically copy and pasting the policies implemented by Vancouver over the past 20 years, we're starting to see kind of a mini downtown east side emerge in Victoria as well, kind of in my own backyard. So watching these policies come over from Vancouver to Victoria was another reason to dive into this topic.
Oh, well, I must say that I'm a recovering alcoholic, which most people listen to the show know. 22 years in recovery, and so I'm in that community, and I lived through the COVID times, watching very closely the numbers of fentanyl and other overdoses in Vancouver, which were obviously they were eclipsing the COVID deaths by a lot. I mean, it was just the numbers were incredible. And as someone who is in abstinent recovery, doing the hard work, it's almost shocking to fully take on that you live in a country where there can be that kind of wholesale slaughter of sick people, and nobody's really talking about it, are they?
No, that's a really good point, and that was another thing that really motivated me to get involved in this topic. Just for a couple benchmarks, I mean, the as you pointed out, in that first year of COVID, the overdose deaths in British Columbia eclipsed COVID deaths significantly. Over 2,000 people died in just 1 year, and to put that as another kind of benchmark, back when the policies surrounding harm reduction started, and I know we'll talk about this more, in the early 2000s, around 2001, 2002, it was seen as a crisis, overdoses, because 150 people in British Columbia were dying a year. And now that's up to 2,000 after 20 years of I would call them objectively failed policies, given they were brought in to reduce overdose deaths, and they've only ended up exploding.
Well, we'll definitely get into your documentary about what's happened to the city as a result of this, because it's all connected, and it's all connected to this inept managerial class who've taken over our lives. And as I say on the show, most of the stories we do, they may seem kind of disparate and not connected, but they're all connected in the same way, that we are being managed by fools. And they're foolish because they are driven by ideology, and they often can't see what is before their very eyes. And what Aaron has done is he has put what they are not seeing before their very eyes in stark, stark relief in this wonderful little film about how Vancouver is going down. So we will get to the difference between harm reduction and abstinence a little bit later. But I want Aaron first to lay out the problem, first of all, of how let's just talk about some of the scenes first, and then I'll play a little bit of the doc, and then we'll come back and analyze why it happened. But what do you see on the streets now?
You mean in downtown Vancouver?
Yes.
So, I mean, a couple things. First of all, let me just say, beyond what you see, and I mean, as far as what you see, I mean, you see open defecation, you see, I mean, open drug use everywhere you go. And this is not just limited to the downtown east side. For those who know the geography of Vancouver, this is radiated out to downtown proper, to Yaletown, to Gastown, and it's just everywhere. And beyond the kind of open degeneracy, for lack of a better word or better way of describing it, that's been kind of taking over the city, has been the large increase in crime, specifically violent crime. So violent assaults up over 30% in just the last couple years. And you have now a situation where on average, you have 4 random stranger attacks every single day in Vancouver. That's individuals, this isn't connected to gangs or anything like that. These are just ordinary Vancouverites going about their life who are 4 of them violently attacked every single day. So that's another thing that's happening. Even more troubling than some of the stuff you see on the streets is these very real impacts of crime, and especially violent crime.
Well, so I want to just go to, we're going to just play a couple of minutes of the beginning of Aaron Gunn's film, Vancouver is Dying. And then obviously this is audio only and you're not seeing it. But when we come back from hearing the clip, I want him to describe some of these amazing scenes of, and I've seen them in other cities too, these kind of slow motion driving shots where people have just shot up or become high and they're kind of frozen in space like it's some kind of a science fiction movie. It's really, really sad to see. So let's play a couple minutes of Aaron's film, which is called Vancouver is Dying. We'll be back right after it to talk more.
People are afraid in Vancouver. You shouldn't have to walk down the street looking over your shoulder, but that's the way it is now.
You just kind of get used to this being part of what it means to be a Vancouverite. This isn't normal, and this is actually something wrong, and that we should hold our political leaders accountable for presiding over something that is clearly not okay.
We had a good city in the 90s. What the f*** happened, man?
What is happening to Vancouver? One of the wealthiest and most naturally beautiful cities in all of North America has been beset by skyrocketing crime, violent attacks, and a crippling battle with addiction that's literally left thousands of people dead. But what is at the root of all these problems? Do police have the tools they need to do their jobs? Are violent offenders being released with little to no regard for public safety? And has an ideological obsession with so-called safe supply and free drugs overshadowed the desperate need for treatment, recovery, and rehabilitation?
Harm reduction. Somebody's got a sense of humor, man. Because that shit ain't helping nobody, man. It's helping everybody get high more.
Everywhere you look that this stuff has taken hold significantly, the cities have become destroyed.
My name is Aaron Gunn, and this is Politics Explained.
So that's pretty shocking stuff. When someone is driving past one of these kind of open air drug doing areas, what do you see? What are you witnessing? What do the people look like?
I mean, it's hard to put into words if you haven't actually been there. Maybe the closest example or the closest comparison I could make is some kind of, feels like you're in some kind of dystopian future failed state, or somewhere between that and a zombie apocalypse, I suppose. You have just, like I said, open drug use is rampant. You've got people stumbling around, passed out on the side of the street, in various states of being high on whether it's crystal meth or heroin or fentanyl. And it's very dystopian. You also have something. When we were filming, I know this is kind of an active situation, so things are changing. When we were filming, the city had announced a change in that they used to do something called, I think it was street sweeps, which is basically in the evenings the city would go around with police and basically clean any structures or garbage or whatever on the streets. And they essentially stopped doing that for some progressive, I can't remember exactly what their rationale was. They were invading the spaces of people's homes or something. So what ended up happening within 48 hours is the sides of this handful of blocks in Vancouver literally transformed into a jungle-like tent city almost overnight. So you had you had various kind of structures and tents had been set up everywhere. You could barely walk down the sidewalk. People were, in many cases, hiding weapons and other things in these tents and in various structures. It was something else to see. We had a police escort to walk through it and filming it, which is definitely something that we were glad to have, because it is not a safe place to be. And just for context for people, this is not that far from the core of downtown Vancouver. Like, this is This is a matter of blocks away.
Well, so, and I just want to be clear too, because you pointed this out, and I've also seen it in the work of Leighton Woodhouse and Michael Schellenberger, who are kind of doing films about what's happening in California. And that is that the people in these tent cities are not actually homeless people, in the sense that there are other places they could be, but they choose to be in this environment. Why is that?
Yeah, so for the most part, what we found out, and this was definitely one of the revelations that was news to me as I was producing this documentary, and people would openly tell us this, is for the most part, there is shelter available to anyone who needs it, who wants it, and is willing to abide by kind of basic rules that you need to abide by to live in kind of a shared space. The thing is sometimes these shelters involve restrictions like not being able to do drugs, for example, in the open, and also they have certain policies around coming and going and things like that. And a lot of these individuals who you see living on the streets don't want to abide by any rules or can't abide by any real rules for whatever reason, and choose and prefer to live on the streets or live in these tent cities. And a lot of the times you see them advocating for housing, but specifically what they actually want is housing without restrictions, basically just kind of a Lord of the Flies, free for all, and that is their real aim. So that's including of the advocacy groups that are supporting them.
So just to be clear here, Aaron, based on what you found, the people who are in these tent cities are people who, primarily are suffering from drug problems? What's the percentage, do you think, of addiction in this population?
So I think this is a really key point to the documentary and what we discovered and chatting with people that were both experts in this field and homeless and previously homeless or recovering addicts. And that is that you see this framed a lot as a homelessness crisis. You see this framed a lot as your mental illness, which definitely plays a role, but this is a drug issue, and whether you're looking at the crime that's been spiking in Vancouver, whether it's the homelessness, whether it's just the general kind of degeneracy that's radiated out from the downtown east side, it is hard drug use that is at the core, and drug addiction, which is at the core of all of these problems. If you removed drug addiction and drugs and you were able to isolate that, you'd solve 95% of the problem. That's what we heard over and over and over again. So I think that's a key thing to really understanding, that this isn't some kind of this isn't a shortage of homes you can't there's a huge labor shortage right now. There's there's people, this isn't the Great Depression where you have people kind of ending up on the streets because of economic conditions. This is a drug-fueled crisis, and so I think that the first step to solving a problem is to understanding what it actually is. So that was kind of a really important revelation for us to come to.
So it's drugs, and for some reason, I guess there's two issues, right? There's why are so many people addicted to drugs, which is kind of a sociological question, isn't it? And why is it so hard to get them off of drugs? Are we doing the right things to help people get off of drugs?
Yeah, so this was another, we were able to chat with, so one of the leading people that we chatted with in the documentary is someone named Marshall Smith, who used to be kind of a senior staffer for the BC government, ended up getting caught up in drugs and alcohol, and a problem that just kept getting worse. And he went from working for the BC government, or as he put it, trading in a suit and tie, and ended up living in a shipping container for, I believe, 5 years in the downtown, or just outside the downtown east side, homeless in Vancouver. And that was about 10, 15 years ago. He since got into recovery and made a remarkable transformation to the point where just 2 weeks ago, he was appointed the chief of staff for the new premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith. So he features very prominently in the video, and his road to recovery. And before that, he was also the chief of staff to the Minister of Mental Health and Addiction. So he, as someone who's actually lived it and been there, He thinks basically everything that British Columbia has been doing has been 100% completely backwards and making the problem worse. And he introduced us to a recovery facility in Vancouver, which we toured, and a whole bunch of former addicts or recovering addicts. And the thing that maybe surprised me the most making this documentary is that they were the most outspoken ones. They were the ones that have been there, done it, gone through it, been to hell and back, metaphorically, who had the harshest things to say about the current approach by the BC government and some of these harm reductionist policies in isolation that have been going on. And, they, as far as, what do you do to help these people? I think the first step is not to enable and normalize what is very destructive behavior for themselves as individuals, obviously for their friends and family, and for communities and taxpayers at large. And that's the BC government's current approach, is to basically, right now in British Columbia, it's easier to get hard drugs, it is easier to get your next fix than it is to get into recovery. And that is completely 100% backwards.
That is so wrong. That's so wrong, Aaron. I mean, as someone who, as I said earlier, who was in an abstinent 12-step recovery program, I mean, we kind of roll our eyes at harm reduction, right? I mean, I suppose there's a little bit of maybe a place here and there where it's probably useful, but the focus on removing abstinent recovery, it just seems like a kind of a deadly decision on behalf of the province. Why are they doing that? Is this a new progressive way?
So two things. I think the first is that, so one thing that the chief medical officer in BC, Bonnie Henry, came out and said, which had recovered addicts completely in an uproar, was that, if you're addicted to alcohol, there are certain abstinence-based programs that can help you. But if you're addicted to opioids, kind of sorry, you're out of luck. You might have to be kind of on drugs or some kind of opioid supplement for the rest of your life. And that's just completely 100% not true. We spoke with, and there are thousands of people who have been, crippling addicted to opioids, addicted to fentanyl, who have gotten off the streets and gotten clean and returned to being productive, tax-paying members of society again. And the idea that somehow you lose your agency and you're beholden to these opioids is just not true, and also very dangerous for a chief medical officer to send that message out to the, let's be frank, the thousands of people who are addicted to them right now in BC and across the country. So I think that's a really important myth that we have to dispel.
Yeah, I don't know where that came from. I will tell you that out here in Ontario, I'm kind of peripherally around that tribe myself, and if you want to get somebody into recovery, they hear the click, they know it's time, they want to go, which is when you pounce and get them in. We just don't have the facilities here to do it. There aren't enough of them, or they're too expensive, or we can't do a medical whatever. I mean, it's shocking. But they do all this other expensive stuff that doesn't seem to be working and is destroying cities like Vancouver. So it's very frustrating to watch this happening, Aaron.
Yeah, and the other thing I'd add is how we got into this mess. Yeah, you made a point earlier, because this is a problem with, I'll call them the left more broadly, that we see on multiple issues, but it's an ideological driven approach as opposed to one that's based in evidence, common sense, or what you see in front of your eyes. And how we got into this, like I think how the left usually gets tied up in these kind of ideological battles, is, they start off with good intentions and then it basically spirals in the wrong direction. So where the concept of harm reduction started in Vancouver is Vancouver was kind of leading the way when you had the AIDS epidemic. And that's when harm reduction as a concept was first kind of fleshed out and built upon. The idea to, stop the transmission of AIDS and all these other things. Then for a variety of reasons, obviously AIDS isn't the issue that it was back in the 80s and 90s. And you had the kind of surging overdose crisis. And they basically tried to, the people that had been spearheading the AIDS harm reduction policy, which was also focused and centered in the downtown east side, basically took that ideology and wanted to copy and paste it to drugs and the opioid crisis. But it doesn't make any sense. I mean, what you have right now is you have a crisis that is being driven by opioids that was actually started in many ways in the United States and Canada by the overprescription of opioids. If you look at OxyContin and some of these other drugs. And their proposal to solve it is by handing out even more opioids for free and with less barriers. And it's this weird fight fire with fire concept that doesn't make sense, I think, to most Canadians. The results have clearly been disastrous, and yet their strategy is just to continue doubling down on the same failed approach.
Well, that seems to be the modus operandi right now. If we fail, we need to do more of what's failing. I mean, seriously. And it's because I will tell you why, Aaron, there's no media to hold them to account, right? That's so they can get away with being wrong and wrong and wrong and wrong. And if it's a policy that legacy media is all in on, they don't take them to the woodshed. So it continues, right? Anyway, that's my view. Aaron, thank you very much for doing this film. I'm very grateful. It's sad to see my hometown going down the tubes in that way, especially watching the addict community there suffering the way they are. It's terrible.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And the one good news is about 2 weeks after the documentary was released, the incumbent mayor who has been spearheading a lot of these policies lost by 20 points.
Wow. And
was absolutely trounced. So maybe brighter days are on the horizon.
You never know. You never know. Anyway, thank you, Aaron, so much. The film is called Vancouver is Dying, and you can find it on YouTube. It's how many views? Like gazillions, right? It's terrific.
Yeah, it's just under 2 million right now.
So you're monetizing, as they say, right?
Yeah, surprising, unexpectedly, yeah.
Good for you. Okay, thanks, Aaron.
Thank you.
I'll talk to you again. Hi, Leighton. How are you?
Hi, good. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you. I guess you heard maybe the back end of that, which was my interview with Aaron Gunn, who's done a wonderful film called Vancouver is Dying. It's my hometown.
Yeah, I've watched it.
Oh, did you watch it? Oh, terrific.
Yeah, it was terrific.
Great. Yeah, he did a really good job. I mean, the legacy media just doesn't touch this stuff, do they? It's nuts. Yeah. But you guys, you and Michael Schellenberger, I think really got the ball rolling on this too with your films on San Francisco. And I want to talk to you about San Francisco because it feels to me that the people who live in those cities they're not really given a choice. It's like what happens to the people who have to live around this is that they need to just be quiet and go away and try to be better people by accepting this kind of craziness in their midst. I just don't understand that as a civic modus operandi.
Yeah. I just spoke actually yesterday. I interviewed a woman who lives in the Tenderloin. So, this is a situation that affects everybody who lives in San Francisco insofar as the entire, increasing swaths of the downtown area are kind of no-go zones for regular people. So that impacts everybody. But of course, it impacts people who live in the Tenderloin the most. And the Tenderloin, it's important for people to understand that the Tenderloin is a dense residential area. It's apartment buildings, lots of pre-war apartment buildings, which are filled with primarily poor immigrant families. And so this is not like LA Skid Row, which is populated more or less mostly by the homeless, and that's it. This is an area where where it's like as if you took Skid Row and you put it in, some neighborhood in Manhattan or something. And so anyway, this woman was an immigrant herself. She's an immigrant from Mexico, a mother of two. She has personally been attacked randomly twice in the Tenderloin. And she told me, no surprise, that when I asked her what she thinks should be done, she said she wanted more cops, she wanted enforcement of the laws. She's scared to leave her house. And the reason why I bring this up is because the public defender of San Francisco has been criticizing the DA and the SFPD and anybody who wants to arrest drug dealers who are primarily Latino because they're all from the ones that are supplied by the cartel are all brought in from Honduras. So they're all Honduran nationals. And so because they're all Honduran, the public defender has been accusing anybody who tries to arrest or charge them with racism, and says openly they're being racist against working class Latinos. Well, this woman is a working class Latino. She's a much more typical working class Latino than some Honduran drug dealer working a corner. She's a working mom who lives in, an apartment in the Tenderloin. She doesn't think she wants more cops. She doesn't think these arrests are some sort of like a racial injustice to her as a Latino. It's preposterous. And the idea that this easy conflation that the public defender and others make between professional drug dealers and regular immigrant families and lumping them all together as working class Latinos, I find not just offensive, but actually racist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. One of the things I was contemplating in prepping for this show, I watched a lot of different videos of cities and neighborhoods that are being kind of afflicted this way. And you cannot help but be kind of having your DNA rearranged, observing the level of human pain. And it's almost like it's kind of a Rorschach test. You either see it or you don't. And, I'm not sure what the question is. I guess what I'm asking you, Leighton, is do the politicians responsible for perpetuating this and not sorting it, do they not see that the people that they're enabling are in deep, deep pain and need to fix something?
I've tried to mind read what's going on in the politicians and the activists' brains myself, and it's hard for me to wrap my mind around it because I think just my own reality and the way that I perceive the world is so different from theirs.
Yeah.
But, ideology is a intoxicating thing. And I think a lot of these folks, when they look around and they see all these people languishing in misery in neighborhoods like the Tenderloin, their thought is that these folks are victims of capitalism or, inequality or some sort of abstract force. Mm-hmm. And they think of what they're doing as help. They honestly think that they are on a noble crusade to help these people by preventing them from having any consequences for the decisions that they make. They don't tend to see this as a drug problem. So this is the most important difference in my perception / your perception and their perception is that they see the people who are homeless and addicted to drugs, they see as first and foremost victims of poverty. And then the drugs is a symptom of that poverty. It's just not the case when you look at the complexity of these people's lives. Like in some cases, you do have people who are down and out and become addicted to drugs. No question about it. You also have a lot of people who became addicted to drugs because they were prescribed OxyContin or Vicodin because after some surgery. You have other people who became addicted to drugs who came from, solid, loving middle-class families, but messed around with recreational drugs, which are now cut with fentanyl, and ended up on the street. There's all types of ways that people end up on the street, and the common denominator is the drugs. And so, if you recognize that the driving force is the drugs, well, then you start to look at, how have people who have been hardcore drug addicts who have gotten their lives together, how did it happen? And when you start interviewing those people, and I've done quite a few of those interviews, you find that people generally get clean after some sort of intervention, some sort of real exogenous shock. And that's not always that's not always law enforcement in the criminal justice system, but it usually is.
Yeah, it's what we call a bottom, right? Like all of a sudden you wake up in handcuffs and you're like, "Ooh, I think maybe I need to stop doing this," or whatever it was, right?
Right.
And
right.
I'm going, yeah.
Yeah, and the people I've spoken to have said straight up, they said being arrested was the best thing that ever happened to me.
1,000,000%. I'll tell you, in the rooms we hear that over and over again. It's amazing how that happens. But it's like the progressive policies that perpetuate this, it's almost like they want to keep them like they're pet animals or something, that, to be kind of petted and felt sorry for and indulged. And indulging an addict is the absolute worst thing you can do. Any parent of a kid with an addiction problem will tell you that indulging them is the road to ruin. So it's clear that these policies aren't doing them any good. Why do they persist in the face of evidence that it's failing?
They don't believe the evidence. I mean, they believe you talk to the folks who are the most sort of radical advocates of harm reduction ideology. And by the way, I believe in a lot of harm reduction strategies. I just think it needs to be coupled with a sort of a set of services that lead you towards recovery and not just leave you there where you're at. But, the folks who are most radical about this, they constantly trot out the term evidence-based to the point where it's become meaningless. And they say, well, the studies have shown this and the studies have shown that. And I asked them to show me these studies, and I have yet to see be given any studies that I found compelling. Well, given any studies at all, honestly. So they believe that their approach is scientifically based, and I've tried to give them the benefit of the doubt and look for scientific literature that shows this, and it's much, much, much more complicated than the picture that they portray. I've looked at a lot of this literature, and they have no more of a claim to this stuff being evidence-based than the people on the other side who are talking about recovery, who are talking about approaches which conform much more to just common sense, like the way to recover from addiction is to stop using drugs.
Yeah. And to do a moral inventory and all the stuff that makes you feel shameful and bad, so you want to use drugs to not feel that way, right? It's really simple, actually. But I want to talk to you a bit about the harm reduction piece of this, because I fear that maybe for people listening, they won't fully understand what we're talking about. So if you could explain the kind of harm reduction for using addicts that you think is probably worthwhile, and the kind that keeps them stuck in this repetitive hell.
Well, harm reduction started, the phrase began, I believe, in the 1980s, with when needle exchange programs were introduced. And it was harm reduction then meant a set of very pragmatic measures to keep people safe, not just users themselves, but also the general public. So, for example, needle exchange programs prevented transmission of HIV and other bloodborne illnesses to users. It also prevented the spread of hepatitis C to both users and to the general public. So these were just the idea was the whole war on drugs kind of absolute prohibition and that's it philosophy of the 80s wasn't working because addiction is addiction. People are, you can shame people all you want to. They're addicted. They're going to keep using. And as long as they're going to keep using, then we should keep them safe. So that was the idea to begin with. And I still think that's sensible. But as I said before, the idea is you keep people safe in their usage, but then you steer them towards programs in which they can liberate themselves from their use, programs where they can quit. But what happened with the harm reduction philosophy over the decades is that it morphed into something which was not just these kind of these pragmatic public health steps, but it became more of a social philosophy and a political agenda. Now the harm reduction practice is funded by, for example, the Drug Policy Alliance is a big part of propping up the harm reduction ideology. The Drug Policy Alliance is funded primarily, hugely by George Soros,
right.
And they believe in legalization of drugs, of hard drugs, and so it became something much more expansive. And now what it means is not just those practical measures, but it also means we shouldn't stigmatize people who use drugs, or we shouldn't stigmatize drug use, period. Like the usage of drugs should not be frowned upon. That we should accept it, that there's nothing wrong with it, unless the user themselves thinks there's something wrong with it, that we should have safe consumption sites, which I think that there's room for, but I don't believe that they should be in every neighborhood. But safe consumption sites where you have city supervised consumption, and that ultimately that the government should pass out drugs, that we should have what's called safe supply, where the government gives meth to people. So we've already got the government giving out paraphernalia to people, but a lot of these harm reduction advocates are calling for the government to actually supply the drugs to people, and then ultimately not just decriminalization but legalization of drugs. So this is a political agenda which is far beyond these sort of practical steps to keep people alive. Putting in place these measures would and have, because some of these measures have been put in place, totally transform the social fabric of our cities. And so this is something that everybody has a stake in.
When you say that they totally transform the social fabric, please give me a description of the way that has happened and what you see. Let's talk about San Francisco.
Sure. Well, and your last guest, I'm sure, spoke about this too, vis-a-vis Vancouver, where it's just as bad. But, for example, one part of harm reduction, this sort of destigmatization of drug use language is put in practice with opposition to sweeps of homeless encampments and support for non-enforcement of public camping laws. So now you've got in the Bay Area, you've got people under highway underpasses. Of course, that's been around for forever, but now you've got public parks. In some cases, playgrounds. You've got sidewalks in front of schools that are crowded with tents. Not only is that just inconvenient because it's unsightly, but also you have to, you're walking your kids to school and you have to walk into traffic because there's no space on the sidewalk. But also these like, let's not kid ourselves. These tent encampments are sites of open drug use, open drug dealing, prostitution, violence, rape. This stuff all accompanies the sort of the drug addiction phenomenon and the drug trade, and so this stuff is all being exposed in front of kids. I interviewed a teacher in the Mission who, public schools in San Francisco, it's the same as LA. Like if you're in public school, you're probably, first of all, non-white, second of all, working class, third of all, very likely from an immigrant background, because if you're a white middle class kid, you're not going to San Francisco public schools, just like you're not going to LA public schools. So these are kids who are poor, non-white, come from a lot of them from immigrant backgrounds. He had this tent encampment on the sidewalk right in front of the school, and this is during COVID-19 when the directives from the city were to keep all the windows open in order to keep airflow to protect against COVID. The school couldn't keep the windows open because if they did, marijuana smoke and God knows what else would blow into the classrooms. There were constant fights, and then when there were fights, of course, the kids would run from their desks and run up to the windows to see what was happening. There was a guy who's like publicly exposing himself to children, so they had to keep the windows closed during COVID-19. Like this is unacceptable. These are not choices that regular people should have to make in order to accommodate an open drug market on the sidewalk in front of a school. It's preposterous.
And you know what it says to me? I'm not sure I can put this in words exactly how I'm feeling about it, but the fact that the citizenry in San Francisco are not up in arms about this in a major way, I mean, throwing people out of office and demanding that it be cleaned up, says something to me about the demise of civilization more generally. It's like a state of cognitive dissonance to me that people will just live in a city and accept that. I stepped over people like that in Seattle when I was there doing a film about Ted Bundy and was staying in a reasonably good hotel downtown and going over to the Nordstrom to shop once in a while, and there were tents everywhere, and the people in them were really aggressive, right? They were very so I felt agitated and upset, obviously for their problem too. You can't confront that and not feel sad about it, but also that my safety and that the safety of the other people on the street didn't seem to matter either. So my question, sorry to be so long-winded, but my question is, why doesn't the citizenry rise up and sort this out, force them to sort it out?
Well, we should check in a week about that, because we've got an election next week. I just wrote a story that went up today in the Spectator about the the various races in San Francisco.
What's going to happen?
Well, right now, the Brooke Jenkins, who's the new DA, who was appointed to replace, the infamous Chesa Boudin, she has been very clear that she is in favor of arresting and prosecuting drug dealers and compelling treatment for drug addicts and all these sort of practical steps that are in San Francisco, very much a break from the past. She's the most popular politician in San Francisco right now by far. In fact, she's she's among various political institutions that were polled, including the police department, the schools, the mayor, and the board of supervisors. She was the only one who was more popular than she was unpopular. She's particularly popular among Asians, by the way, because Asians have felt completely abandoned by the last DA during all of those the incidents of street violence against Asians. So she's the most popular politician in San Francisco. She has pledged to charge drug dealers of fentanyl whose sales can be connected to lethal overdoses with murder. And that decision has the support of 69% of the electorate in San Francisco. So we are seeing a fed up electorate in a very liberal city, and I just reported from Portland, where I was seeing where I saw much the same thing. Portland, the state of Oregon might vote a Republican governor in, which is like unthinkable. And it's because people are fed up with this stuff. And so I think we are seeing that voter revolt. And if it doesn't pan out next week, look, Brooke Jenkins is going to be elected, but there are a couple of supervisor races which are more sort of like litmus tests. And if those go the other way, then I'll be right there with you, and I'll be wondering, why the hell is there not more of a reaction? But right now, the possibility is very live that politics could change dramatically after next Tuesday.
The whole thing feels very kind of although that's a hopeful note, and I hope she wins, but it feels very kind of end of civilization to me. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that makes me feel that way right now, but I mean, this feels that way too, to have this kind of human pain, this kind of carnival of pain and death and filth on full display in once great American cities. It's really, I don't mean to be too poetic about it, but it really feels like something bad has happened culturally to you people, and us too up here. I'm not saying we're not the same, but how do you view that?
I mean, it's the story that I reported on in Portland. I was just there last week, and I talked to these folks who live in this floating homes community, which is sort of like halfway between like a house and a houseboat. And they all lived on these floating homes. And across the street from that community is a nature preserve in which a tent encampment emerged, which is the biggest one in Portland. Hundreds of people. It was recently cleared just a few weeks ago. Hundreds of people. When they cleared it, there were live pigs that the residents were raising. There was a chop shop, like an industrial scale chop shop. The cops dragged like hundreds, I think over 160 cars, stolen cars out of that chop shop site. There were one homeless person told a guy I know who runs homeless services for the neighboring city that there are bodies buried there of residents of the encampment who died. They would just bury them there so as not to attract attention. There was one guy told me that you could smell the paint thinner like smell of meth labs that were erected on this property. This is on a nature preserve. These are like protected wetlands, and it had been there for years. And the folks in this floating homes community, suddenly they started their cars started getting broken into, their cars started getting stolen. One guy came home and found somebody in his shower They were like, there was a dog kidnapping and ransom ring being run out of that homeless encampment. So, and this was for years. This is like, it started in 2018 and it was just cleared a few weeks ago. So, of course the city did nothing about it. At one point, they're being bounced from agency to agency. They finally got a meeting, and an aide to a state rep told them that they should go, that these were just folks who needed a hand up, and they should go and have a barbecue for the residents of the encampment. And that was her suggestion to them. So yeah, to those Portlanders, it felt like some real like end of day stuff. Just yesterday, I spoke to a woman in Portland who she's this Native American woman. She owns a cafe, and she used to do these coffee with a cop things, where basically the cops would come in and they'd have coffee, and people from the neighborhood be able to come and ask questions, have a dialogue with the police. The sergeant asked her just I think a month ago or so if she could, a few weeks ago actually, if she could do another one. And online on like Instagram, she said yes, and she advertised it. She started getting all these negative responses on Instagram, and then the next day she comes to her store and somebody had smashed out all her windows, and they'd taken a fire extinguisher filled with compressed paint and just like unleashed it on the inside of her cafe, spray painting everything with a fire extinguisher. And it was, which is, it's terrorism. And she held the thing anyway. She had the coffee with a cop inside this this vandalized cafe. But I mean, that's the kind of lawlessness that people in Portland are seeing all the time. So yes, it very much had this sort of end of days feel to it. But look, I mean, consequently, they might elect the first Republican governor in 40 years.
It's really funny. And so the person or people who attacked her little shop there, coffee shop, what manner of person would they have been? Would they have been people who hate the cops, people who hate homeless people, or Antifa? Like why would somebody do that to her?
Because she was collaborating with the cops. They were like, they did this because they saw her, because she was inviting cops into her cafe to have conversations with neighbors, that she was some sort of a collaborator. So she didn't know who they were, but my guess is, and I don't think that, and they weren't caught, but my assumption is that it was Antifa types, the same people who had been rioting for a year straight in downtown Portland, shooting Molotov cocktails at the federal building down there, smashing windows with garbage cans. I interviewed one woman who worked for U.S. Bank there. She said that their boss told them in the midst of all these riots that if things got out of hand, the plan was that all the employees would go down and lock themselves into the bank vault. Like, imagine that's your day-to-day living in downtown Portland. It's like you're on your own. Your self-protection is to lock yourself in the bank vault. It's insane.
It is insane. It's so weird for me to hear this because, I don't understand it. And part of it is probably just because I'm like super old and I missed a bunch of stuff because I was so busy working. But I grew up out there in Vancouver and up and down the coast from mostly working class family. And, we would drive down through Bellingham and then take that lovely road through Oregon and Portland. And I remember those sort of quaint, pretty little, coastal and slightly inland towns along the West Coast there. And it's really hard for me to square, obviously what was happening during the, during the big riots a couple of years ago. I mean, I didn't really understand sort of culturally what had happened there to make it vulnerable to those kinds of outbursts. It just didn't make sense. I mean, what did happen out there?
I mean, yeah, I agree. Portland is an absolutely stunningly beautiful city, and it still is, despite the blight. And that's very apparent when you drive through Portland, which makes it all the more tragic. But much like the Bay Area, this is the result of deliberate policies that were put in place. I mean, Measure 110 was passed in Portland it was a voter initiative which decriminalized essentially drug possession. and it fueled the addiction crisis. And everybody regrets 110 now. Like all the including the Democratic candidate has pledged to make some changes to 110. Christine Drees and the Republican candidate wants to repeal it. But we had the same thing in California with Prop 47, which decriminalized drug possession as well as shoplifting. And I voted for that. Like at the time, I thought, it sounded great, like decriminalization, great. But I didn't know, I didn't understand what the knock-on effects would be. And essentially, by decriminalizing crime, guess what? You end up with more criminals. It's like people respond to incentives, and people respond to lack of deterrence. And so if you decriminalize crime, you end up with lawlessness. It's not that complicated.
I guess what's interesting about that premise for me is that I probably would have been with you in decriminalizing those kinds of minor things, because one assumes that most people are not kind of innately criminal, right? So if decriminalizing things makes people behave in a more criminal way, that says something awful about human nature, doesn't it?
Well, what you end up with, I mean, the thing that also fuels this is the addiction crisis, right? So you have decriminalization of these of minor drug possession, but then minor drug possession by California standards, you can have enough to be a dealer and still have it be considered minor drug possession. So essentially decriminalize, at the time that I voted for it and everybody else thought we were just voting for decriminalizing people who were just had enough for possession, but that's not the case. You can carry enough to deal. And if you're carrying more than that, you can have some homeless person pay them or threaten them to hold your stash, which is what the dealers do all the time, so that they are holding a small enough amount that they can't be busted, essentially. But then also, decriminalizing shoplifting. Yeah, you're thinking, okay, well, some kid wants to shoplift, some candy bars or something. They shouldn't face criminal penalties for that. That sounds great.
Right.
Some poor mom is stealing diapers or something. She shouldn't have to suffer for that. Well, when you throw in the addiction crisis, then you have people who are homeless and addicted to drugs, and they have to raise money to support their habit, and they have to do it every few hours. And guess what? What they turn to is shoplifting, because it's been effectively decriminalized. So then you go into stores in San Francisco, and you've seen the viral videos. People are just brazenly just shoving things into their bags, and you have lawlessness in these stores. And then, of course, the stores end up either closing, restricting their hours, which means laying off staff, which also means, like, in the case of pharmacies, it means that old people who need their prescription drugs have to take a bus across town to get to the more affluent area to be able to get their prescription drugs filled. There's all kinds of knock-on effects. And then also there's just and then there's a kind of a more of a bunker mentality put into these grocery stores where you have everything behind lock and key. It changes the social fabric of your day-to-day existences when everything is about security, because we have effectively removed the law enforcement apparatus for dealing with these petty crimes. So it has profoundly changed the way that it just feels to exist in these American cities for everybody.
And so I guess my question to you about the progressive wing of the Democratic Party that is kind of responsible for a lot of this stuff, on a human level, do they not see the trouble they're causing? In other words, are they so blinded by their own zealotry that they can't weigh the kind of risk benefit of these policies once they start really to fail, as clearly they have?
I think there's a lot of cognitive dissonance, and then there's a lot of different examples of different things. So there are definitely those people who are doubling and tripling down on this stuff and just saying the same talking points that they've always said. And you do start to wonder, like, do these people have eyes? Like, are they really that deluded that they can't see what the consequences are? But again, ideology is very intoxicating. There's also a lot of people who have started. There's a woman who's running for the Board of Supervisors in San Francisco, who is very much of that far left progressive persuasion, and she's now talking about arresting drug dealers and all this stuff because she sees which way the wind is blowing, right? And so she's saying what she needs to do to get elected, and chances are she'll pivot back to her traditional politics before if she is elected. So so there are those people who are a little savvier and are cynically pivoting towards the center, and I'm sure there's many people who are genuinely pivoting towards the center. Myself, I'll put myself in that camp. Like, I used to be very, very, very left wing about criminal justice stuff, but I didn't know what I was talking about. Like, I hadn't spent the time to report this stuff out. I hadn't spent the time talking to people who are relatives of addicts, recovered addicts, law enforcement, social workers, all the people who I've had the benefit and the privilege of talking to since I'm a journalist. So I just didn't, I just went kind of with my knee-jerk reflexes. But I have become I've updated my point of view since I've learned this stuff, and I think that there's probably a lot of other people like me. In fact, I know there are, because I've spoken to a lot of people like that who have just become more realistic about what criminal justice reform means.
Yeah, well, this is the sign of an agile mind, somebody who changes their opinion based on new information, right? It's really rare these days.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, this is way off topic, but since I've got you, I think you might know something about this, and it's always bothered me. Who and what are Antifa in your view? Because, I mean, in watching all the trouble out there when it was happening, and even now they're kind of showing up at some of the drag queen story hour shows as well. But people would say, oh, they don't exist. What are you talking about? Like, even there was one Democratic member who was door stopped he was walking somewhere in the Capitol, and someone asked him about it, and he said, they don't exist, right? So clearly they do, but they have a really interesting way of, it's hard to kind of grab a hold of them. And I'm wondering, I trust your judgment, and I know you're a great reporter. What do you know about them? I mean, like the factual basis of who and what they are and what is their purpose?
Joe Biden actually said, oh, Antifa is an idea, which came as a surprise to me, because then I have, maybe I'm the first human being ever to have watched an idea beat the crap out of somebody in front of my face.
Really?
Because I've seen that. I've covered some of these protests. I've watched Antifa dressed up in black bloc and just going and picking people practically at random, like people who have, for example, refused to put down their cameras when they're ordered to by Antifa, and then they surround them, accuse them of being Nazis so that nobody will intervene, and beat the crap out of them. This is fascist activity. They call themselves anti-fascist, but I can't think of anything more fascist than having a street mob that just goes and picks on anybody who disagrees with them and beats the crap out of them. So Antifa, I know quite a bit about that. I'm quite familiar with them. I've done some reporting on them in the past. It's radical left-wing activists, and I say this with some sympathy for radical left-wing politics. I came out of that world myself, but there's a certain point where you become so militant that you become nihilistic. I mean, my sense of Antifa these are folks who see everybody as an oppressor, everybody who's not like in their protected categories, meaning any just normal middle class America, as a force of reaction and oppression, and they want to tear down every institution in the country with no proposals for what to replace it with. And this is why I call them nihilistic, right? They're like, abolish the police, burn down the police station, destroy representative democracy, and burn everything down, replace it with nothing. This is sort of the anarchist creed, or what the anarchist creed has become. So it's just sheer nihilism. It's just tearing things down without building anything up. And that's what it's become sort of a living force in American politics now.
They have, and I guess, I don't know if this is a fair question or not, but it feels sometimes like they, in a sense, are aligned with, if not adjacent to, the Democratic Party too, because the Democratic Party denies that they exist. And you just said Joe Biden and this other person who's ever forgotten, but what is that relationship? Is it just kind of convenient for the Democrats that you've got these kind of nuts out there smashing people in the head who are usually right of center? Is that the relationship is, or what do you think?
I mean, I can tell you for certain that if you talk to Antifa people and you mention the Democratic Party, they would like have nothing but sheer contempt, because that's part of the cosplay, right? They're like, we're so radical, and the Democratic Party is just part of the, you know, capitalist bourgeois state or whatever. But you know, we were treated to the comedic view of Antifa in LA in that crazy summer of 2020, beating people up for protesting government mandates, vaccine mandates. So
Right.
you have Antifa anarchists beating people up for not obeying a government mandate. It's
Right?
absolutely
I know.
mind-boggling. So in that sense, yeah, I mean, they were clearly the kind of the foot soldiers doing the bidding of the city and state governments, and that's pretty crazy. But they obviously don't see themselves that way. You know, I think Antifa is probably an embarrassment to most Democrats, and that's probably part of the reason why they distance themselves from them and deny their existence. But yeah, I mean, they kind of are the militant wing of what's become standard Democratic policy. I mean, the things that they're calling for, you know, all this kind of dividing up the world into oppressors and victims, and all this obsession with race, and you know, all this stuff is very much a part of that radical left wing ideology, and it has become very central to mainstream Democratic politics.
Well, I think I understand why they would go after the people who were against mandates, and that's because this is how, like, it's a strange bedfellows part of the whole political scene right now, but because the people who are protesting mandates were generally portrayed in legacy media as being conservatives. Right. So automatically they're the enemy of Antifa, even though Antifa is actually demonstrating and fighting for more government oppression.
Right.
By going, right. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's just, it is, it feels really performative, except I think they're dangerous. My last question about them is, just because I've got you and I can, is are they kids? Are they like mostly white university kids underneath those balaclavas? Who are Antifa?
I think that's a bit of an unfair stereotype, although I understand why it exists. Yes, I think they are primarily white, but certainly not, far from exclusively so. They are overwhelmingly young, although also not exclusively so. I would push back on there being college kids, though. There are definitely college kids who belong to Antifa, but there are also a lot of working class kids who come into that movement, or at least that's the way it used to be. I don't know how it is now, but I know that, like, for example, in the Portland and Eugene anarchist community in Oregon back in the day, pretty similar to it's a pretty similar scene here in the Bay Area. A lot of those kids came from working class families, and a lot of them were even like runaways, you know, came from broken homes. But you also have a lot of just like woke kids. But by the way, back then, you know, colleges were woke, but not as woke as they are now. So, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if there were many more college degree, you know, like middle class kids with college degrees who today who come out and, you know, put on their black bloc uniforms and join Antifa. So I think it's a mix. But I think that stereotype is a bit unfair. But as with most stereotypes, there is some basis in reality.
Yeah, well, it's just that I guess I equate them a bit with the Evergreen College stuff too, which is why I said that. But I want to ask you also. I talked to Nancy Rommelman a bit about this way back when it was going on, and she seemed to have had a reasonably good kind of working relationship with all parties during some of the more insane Portland situations, and I guess I'm wondering how much violence you think is really committed. Are they seriously scary, or are they just boastful children?
So there were I mean, first of all, they are scary. And even without committing direct violence against a human being, you know, they were doing things like, as Nancy reported, you know, marching through residential neighborhoods at midnight, beaming flashlights into people's bedrooms while their children are sleeping, you know, chanting hostile chants at the residents of these just residential neighborhoods. That stuff is scary, and rioting is scary. Obviously, rampant property destruction in public is pretty terrorizing. But there were murders during those protests, and up in Chaz in Seattle, there were quite a few of them. And it, when with some of those cases of these murders, it gets dicey when you look at these videos as to whether it was protesters engaging in this stuff or some different element. Like there was a case, I believe it was in Portland or Seattle. Now I'm forgetting, one of the two, where there was a guy who was pulled out of a truck and like drop kicked in the head. And it was all on video. It was really nauseating to watch. And there were those who claimed that it was protesters. They looked kind of like they were part of the protests, but there were other people who were like, no, those are the guys who hang out in the convenience store parking lot. I think what happened was that these protests in 2020 would come into town, and then there would be this radical element of like Black Bloc Antifa people who would kind of tail along with it and smash windows and engage in these criminal activities. And then there was this sort of like world of like fringe characters who weren't really political, but then they would glom onto the protests and they would march with the protests and sometimes like carry signs and stuff. But they were kind of like fringe folks who were either criminals or sometimes drug addicts and just kind of these fringy folks. And then the general climate of lawlessness engendered the conditions in which you would have these like semi-random acts of violence. And it's hard to tell at that point. It's kind of just this big blob of lawless people. And, was this person part of the protest or not? It's kind of becomes a matter of opinion. It was just this general kind of mob rule. And that's the danger of this stuff. Like Antifa people were definitely carried out acts of violence. People who were definitely Antifa definitely carried out acts of violence against their opponents. I mean, that was happening on a daily basis in Portland with all that stupid Patriot Prayer stuff. But also, they just set a tone and set kind of a vibe in which encouraged just general criminal activity. And that's what's been happening in Portland for years. It's been happening in San Francisco, not so much because of Antifa, but more because of the open air drug market. It's been happening up and down the West Coast.
Yeah. What do you make of the level of violence that seems to be exposing itself in some American cities now? What do you think is happening there? It feels a little bit like, culturally, and I include Canada in this too, although we're always a few years behind you guys when things are going not well. But what do you think is going on there? Is there a battle for the soul of the country? And I don't mean politically. I just feel like people are unhappy. And I've seen these videos. They're probably overplayed. That's fine. But I've seen videos where a random guy will throw another random person on the ground and stomp on his head. The head stomping thing always freaks me out because it's so grim. And, I don't know what to make of it. Have you put some thought to that?
I was doing some reporting on the rise in violence in Oakland a couple of years ago. In the Bay Area, I mean, where I live, there were the attacks on Asians, but that feels like it's petered off. The more the viral video stuff you're seeing now is out of New York, with people being shoved into subway trains and stuff.
Yeah,
I think some of it is just kind of like, I hate to sound all woo-woo, but a lot of this is this kind of just general vibe shift towards lawlessness. But I think a lot of it is also untreated mental illness, and those two things can be related, right? When you have a lot of untreated mental illness, people who are mentally ill, people are schizophrenic, people who have bipolar disorder and who are prone to violence, which is, a small minority of those who have those mental illnesses, but they exist. And I think that they tend to be triggered by things that are happening in the world around them. So there are all these attacks, like, for example, with the attacks on Asians, I never bought the idea that it's because, Trump called coronavirus the Kung flu or whatever, that there was these attacks on Asians. But I do believe that there was this sort of when these attacks on Asians started, there was many of which were opportunistic crimes. Asians were seen as perceived as carrying a lot of money and being relatively like helpless, and so they'd be attacked for that reason. But then I think that these random attacks which seem to be motivated by nothing. I think a lot of that happened because of the reporting on all the Asian attacks. People just sort of, and like same with the subway pushes. People who are crazy kind of are clued into the idea that people are getting pushed into subway tracks, and then they start pushing people into subway tracks. So I think there's this combination of this sort of general malaise and this sense of lawlessness, and then there's this persistent problem that's always been with us of the fact that we don't know how to deal with our untreated mentally ill on the streets. And they've become sort of activated in a way by the breakdown of civilization and the breakdown of our institutions. And by the way, I don't think it's too late to take those institutions back. I'm not fatalistic about this. I think this could prove to be a phase, and we could find ourselves in a totally different position 5 years from now, or it could go the other way.
Well, I love your optimism. It's wonderful. What I would add to that is maybe another layer in that I think COVID, and I don't mean the virus, I mean the public health policies, maybe added a layer of mental illness to the mix as well. And so people who were fine got a little bit mentally ill, and the people who were a little bit mentally ill got really mentally ill, right? So I think there's that. We were kind of dehumanized by each other. We started seeing each other as vectors only of disease, and we were isolated and scared and, being manipulated and stuff. And so I think that maybe some of this could also be attributed to I'll say the pandemic, but what I mean is the public health policies around the pandemic.
Well, I think there's definitely something to that. I think it was crazy making for everybody. And then I do know, I do know more certainly, because I reported on this, that in my city in Oakland, there was a steep rise in crime, in violent crime during the pandemic. And I interviewed a lot of people about this who would know, like people like violence interrupters, for example, who believed, and it sounds convincing to me, that what happened was that when you shut down work, you had a whole bunch of people, getting these checks and not having to work, and they had a lot of idle time. And when you have idle time, you have more social interaction, social intercourse. So you have more opportunity for people to develop beefs with each other. And you also just don't have, if you're working a 9 to 5, you don't have, first of all, you're not interacting with people with you're not engaged in as much social interaction that could lead to conflict. You're also just tired. At the end of the day, you come home, you've had a full day, you just want to eat dinner, watch some TV and go to bed. And so you don't have time to develop these grudges and stuff. But during COVID, everybody was at home, so domestic violence went way up because people were at home all the time with their spouses going stir crazy. And you also had people, gathering on their stoops or whatever. And it was just more opportunity for social intercourse and therefore social conflict. And that led to, lots of homicides. So it was a very kind of indirect way in which COVID did lead to that rise in violent crime in a way that I wouldn't have expected if I hadn't gone out and talked to people.
Yeah, it's real. We're living through a very, very interesting time. And I hope that when people start doing kind of serious scholarship about it, they're able to absorb all of the kind of disparate things that have happened. It's like, who would ever have thought that a pandemic would happen, that the public health response would be so terrible, that the country would be so divided, that we'd be arguing about I mean, it's nuts. I'm exhausted, and, from it all, trying to make sense of it all. And it doesn't make sense, really, when you think about it. And I guess that's when we should really turn to our spiritual lives in our families to kind of pull us through. But I've spent 2.5 years trying to figure it out, and I'm as confused as I ever was. Before I let you go, you've written so many great pieces, Leighton. I was going to ask you about how weed will become the new OxyContin, which is a subject I really want to talk about, but we don't have time. So I'll move to my next favorite story that you wrote, which is about how the media trains journalists to lie. And I think because it involves John Fetterman and we have this election coming up, it's probably a good story to end on and a good kind of hypothesis to unpack. So tell me, we all know that the media lies. So tell me what your hypothesis is about how it trains its own to do that.
Well, there have been some big changes in media, as everybody knows, over the last 20 years. We used to have a media which was almost 100% subsidized by advertisements. And that was actually a moderating force on the media, because if you were like if you were a newspaper or if you were a nightly news broadcast, you wanted to bring in as many people as possible in order to be able to sell your ads for as much as possible. And in order to do that, you couldn't be too controversial because you couldn't risk driving away a portion of your audience with controversial content. So it had this sort of mediating kind of, vanilla Goldilocks kind of effect on the news. And then the advertising model fell apart because of the internet. In order to pay, ads were overpriced before the internet because you had essentially, if you were an advertiser and you wanted to pay to have your ad run in a newspaper, you were paying a sort of a margin on top of that to pay for the salaries of editors and reporters, because that's how they made their money. So they would charge you an extra in order to support their industry. Then all of a sudden, the internet came along. You had way cheaper and way more effective advertising online where you could do micro-targeted advertising based on consumer preference. You didn't have to pay this margin to keep the media industry afloat. So way cheaper, way more effective. And then the entire business model and the media fell apart. And we all remember when it looked like the media was going to collapse any minute. But the media adopted a new business model. And that business model was to turn to readers and ask them for subscribe to the New York Times or wherever, sort of NPR style, right? It was this idea that you're subscribing, but you're also donating to a cause. Right. And that cause was the New York Times, right? And their valiant journalistic mission. We are speaking truth to power. And this coincided with Trump being elected. And then it became just absolutely on hyperdrive, where you had Trump calling the media the enemy of the people. And so then these media personalities started becoming lionized as these heroes. And then the New York Times could really drive its subscription, saying, we've got a lying fascist president. And by becoming a subscriber to the New York Times, you will help advance our mission of telling the truth and the noble fourth estate, fighting fascism, democracy dies in darkness. That's the Washington Post, etc. And then you start to see this incentive model emerge where the consumers see themselves as contributing to a cause like the ACLU, and the outlets themselves start to regard themselves that way. So they start to regard themselves as ideological, as fighting an ideological battle. Yeah. And then their consumers start to expect that of them. So then every time you had a controversial piece in which, like, the New York Times would run a story which frustrated liberal sensibilities, you would get this backlash from readers and also from the younger reporters that the New York Times had hired after they had switched business models. And so, those folks that sort of cacophony would steer the media towards this kind of this ideological slant. And and of course, everybody knows that the New York Times' reporting has suffered immensely from it. You really can't believe what you read in the New York Times in the way that you used to be able to. And there's you can see this play out in the case that I wrote about was with Dasha Burns, but this has just happened the other day with my friend Li Fong, where somebody writes a story or reports something that runs afoul of sort of liberal pieties, and on Twitter, this like backlash ensues among journalists who scold and vilify and demand your consequences for this is, you know, when Dasha Burns reported on Fetterman's inability to engage in small talk. You know, it was this massive backlash against her on Twitter, and she was vindicated by that debate performance, and I hope she feels vindicated, and I hope she feels that she doesn't need to play it safe in the future. But if that had not happened, Dasha Burns definitely, just being a human being, would have learned her lesson from that and been like, okay, well, I'm going to think twice before reporting balls and strikes the way I see them.
I saw that, and I thought, well, I said she's going to be in trouble for that when I saw her doing that. Yeah. And then, but what happened with Li Fong? Was this the story about the lawsuit or something, or what was the pushback on? This
was a story about government collusion with the tech platforms around censorship.
Yes.
And you know, it's a big story. It's a story that should have been picked up by every outlet, and they should have been, you know, Lee should have been booked on every cable show for the next 3 days. But you know, given our bifurcated partisan media, he was only invited on by conservative media. Tucker Carlson specifically had him on, and he would have gone on MSNBC, on CNN. He contacted Democracy Now! About the story. They didn't invite him on. So he went on Tucker because Tucker had him on. Yeah. And so Tucker had him on. And then, of course, because he was on Tucker Carlson, there was like, he had just dropped this blockbuster story of national importance. And then the blue check media world on Twitter was obsessed over the fact that he had appeared on Tucker Carlson. And so then this like high school level, you know, dogpile ensued of all these people bullying Lee for having shown up. I mean, Lee is too you know, brave and has too much integrity to be bullied, but attempted to bully Lee over his appearance on Tucker Carlson. And this is sort of this like Mean Girls high school effect of modern media culture, where, you know, you run astray of sort of the bien-pensants and the right thinking of the blue checks, and they take it out on you on Twitter, and they mob you and you scold you and you call you names, and the next time around you might think twice before making that mistake again.
Hence the title of your article, How the Media Trains Journalists to Lie, right? Yeah, Lee, that was a big story for Lee, and it's shocking that they would go after him for doing his job in that way. I mean, it just makes me, you know, I'm old enough, Leighton, that I feel I wish I wasn't living through this. You know, I've been doing this for 40 years, and I've seen, I mean, we live in a post-journalism world. That's all I'm going to say. It doesn't exist as I knew it, or at least as it wasn't perfect in the olden days. But wow, I mean, it's just shocking that a report like what I was so enamored with what Lee did. He should win a Pulitzer Prize for that story. It's a massive story. And he's getting shit for it from his colleagues. I mean, woof, what the heck? What is going on down there and up here too? Canada's just as bad. We are just as bad on this stuff. Anyway, Leighton, I'll say it again. You have the best name of anybody writing today, Leighton Woodhouse. I love it.
Thank you.
And we'll have you back again soon. I love talking to you. You're a very, very interesting line into American culture and politics. What do you think is going to happen on election night, by the way?
I mean, I've been paying mostly attention to the local stuff, and then just recently to the Oregon governor's race because I reported on it. But I'm quite hopeful. I think that there's a frustration with the excesses of sort of the woke set. I think that there has been. I trust in normal American people. I think that they tend to have very common sense ways of viewing the world, and I think that there's going to be a much needed correction.
Yeah, well, one hopes this can't go on the way. Everybody is too exhausted with all of it, I think. Leighton Woodhouse, thank you very much for coming on. We're very, very grateful, and we'll see you again sometime.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye. So the first interview you just heard was Aaron Gunn, who is the producer-director of Vancouver is Dying. Go to YouTube and please watch it. I think it's got like 2 million views or something. Amazing. And you know what? The 2 million views on YouTube should scare legacy media, because I'll tell you something, CBC has not had 2 million views of anything for like a couple decades, right? That's really worth seeing. And the other person you heard speaking was Leighton Woodhouse, also a very important, in my view, independent reporter in America who writes for Tablet and various other places. Just Google him. Best name, I think, too, ever for a writer, Leighton Woodhouse. My goodness, it's just brilliant. I won't have any more kids. I'm too old. But if I did, I might name one of them Leighton. So let's get to this piece by Emily Oster. And I'm going to try to not sound too evil and mean about it, but the idea that there should be a pandemic amnesty is so freaking tone deaf to me, given the damage that was wrought by people who are neither admitting the mistake nor apologizing for it. This cannot happen. This is what makes a society and science completely dysfunctional. If you believe the statistics about what lockdowns did, then literally millions of people were killed by food shortages on the continent of Africa and other places, not to mention all of the people who died of the sort of knock-on effect, like the people who died from drug overdoses, the people who committed suicide, the kids whose lives will be foreshortened because they are falling behind in school. That's a thing, right? If you don't do well in school, you die sooner. The division of families, the dividing up in countries of vaccinated versus unvaccinated. I mean, I can't think of anything more destructive than the public health policy surrounding COVID-19. That's it for me. This is it. So breezily moving along and proposing a pandemic amnesty does not work for me. I don't know what the alternative is either. We cannot stay bitter and angry. That's not what I'm saying. I am saying that we should stay awake and wanting a remedy and accountability. That's what we want. We want accountability here, or it's just going to keep happening. Many, many, many systems failed us, didn't they? Media failed. The health protection branch here and the FDA and CDC in the United States failed. Public health bureaucrats failed. Teachers and their unions got it completely wrong. The scientific journals seem to be captured. Pharmaceutical companies seem to be running the show. You know, one of the things I heard over and over again from people was, we can't tell the truth about vaccine injuries because it might cause vaccine hesitancy. Well, why are we protecting the vaccine over the lives of people? Why are we protecting public health and the bureaucracy over the lives of people? Why are we doing that? It is upside down. It is upside down. And it shows how fractured we are in this post-COVID-19 world, where we are treated like cattle. Our deaths don't seem to matter. The pain and suffering doesn't seem to matter to the people who are supposed to be working for us. You know, governments are supposed to be working for us, right? So something's wrong, and we are not going to roll over and let this go. We want accountability in the form of, I hope, public hearings with people under oath. That's what I hope. We've got to have that, people. So one of my favorite commentators on Substack is an anonymous person who seems to be a big deal scientist in Germany who goes under the name of Eugippius. And he wrote something about the Emily Oster and amnesty plan that really kind of resonated with me. I don't know much about the American pandemic pundits, but I gather that Brown University economist and parenting guru Emily Oster is far from the worst of them. Her Twitter timeline suggests she spent the early months of the pandemic terrified about the virus until school closures took their toll on her kids, at which point she repositioned herself as a kind of lockdown moderate, opposing the worst of the hystericist excesses while validating their central premises whenever possible to save face with friends and colleagues. He nails it there, doesn't he? Emily Oster's latest act of moderation is the suggestion that we should forgive and forget all the disastrous policies inflicted on us by terrified, wealthy urbanites, clueless technocrats, and mad scientist vaccinators since 2020, because, hey, they were just honest mistakes. Anybody could have messed up like that. It's all good. So I just want to chime in there. He's absolutely right about that. If you go back to my Substack, there's a piece there that I called If Only They'd Listened. I thought long and hard about posting it because I'm not very good at promoting myself, and I didn't want to look like I was trying to say that I was a smarty pants about this. I'm not. I'm someone who is a science reporter, and I'm not bad at critical thinking. In March, this is a document I sent out in March of 2020 saying, lockdowns are going to be a problem. Keep your eye on Tony Fauci. Everything that happened that was bad, I warned about in that note that I sent to a reasonably high-profile American journalist, hoping that they would disseminate it. How wrong I was. I didn't even hear back from them, right? They just think us Canadians are a bunch of dummies up here or something. But anyway, it's just an historical document. So, and the reason I'm saying it is not to say I'm so smart. What I'm saying is I'm not that smart. But if I could get it right in March of 2020, why the hell can't these highly paid $400,000 a year experts get it right? Why can't they get it right? Why didn't they get it right? So her hypothesis is that we should forgive them because, everybody was scared at the beginning and we had to do the big, terrible things because we were scared and didn't know. That is complete nonsense. So that makes me happy in a sense that I wrote that note and have posted it because it shows I don't even have a science degree. I don't have one, and I got it right. And there were people getting it right, like John Ioannidis at Stanford and others who were saying the bureaucrats in DC and by way of copycatting Ottawa and London are overestimating both the death rate and the infection rate and all. They were just wrong about everything. And so they didn't have to be wrong. It wasn't that the only alternative they had was to do the most extreme thing, because there was good science that what they were doing was based on faulty data, right? So no. Not getting amnesty from me, that's for sure. It's going to take us a generation to get over what they did. So I'm going to just close with Eugippius's brilliant closing graph of this piece, because he always says things the way I wish I could, but can't because he's smarter than I am. Emily Oster may have said a few reasonable things in the depths of her pandemic moderation, but she can take her proposal for pandemic amnesty and shove it all the way up her butt, I'm going to say. I'm never going to forget what these villains did to me and my friends. It is just hard to put into words how infuriating it is to read this breezy trivialization of the absolute hell we've been through, penned by some comfortable and clueless Ivy League mommy economist who is ready to mouth support for basically any pandemic policy that doesn't directly affect her or her family, and then plead that the horrible behavior and policies supported by her entire social milieu are just down to ignorance about the virus. We knew everything we needed to know about SARS-2 already in February of 2020. The pandemicists and their supporters crossed many bright red lines in their eradicationist zeal and ruined untold millions of lives. That doesn't just all go away now. I couldn't agree more with Eugippius on that. I think her piece is in The Atlantic, which is a horror anyway, but food for thought. we got to think about what we want, how we're going to make sure that this never happens again. And in the meantime, stay critical. See ya.